Good morning. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, we welcome you to the event, The Race for a Coronavirus Vaccine, What It Means for Latin America and the Caribbean. IDB President Luis Alberto Moreno will be joined by distinguished guests, Melanie Saville, Director of Vaccine Development, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, David Robinson, Deputy Director of Vaccine Development and Surveillance, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Marco Krieger, Vice President of Health Production and Innovation, Osvaldo Cruz Foundation. The event will be in English with interpretation into Spanish and Portuguese. To select your language, please click on the world icon at the bottom of the screen and choose the language you want to hear. Please send your questions to paulc@iadb.org.
This is Ferdinando Regalia. I'm the head of the Social Protection and Health Division. Let me first, I would like to say a few words to introduce the speakers. With COVID-19 continuing to spread across the region, developing a vaccine that is safe, effective, and can be deployed at scale is one of the greatest challenges of our time. This is quite an heroic task that requires rapid scientific innovation. Right now in the world, there are 125 companies and other institutions are racing to produce a vaccine. Some have already started phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials with tests on humans. And researchers are exploring technologies that have never been used in licensed vaccines before. This effort requires an extraordinary research and development resources, but whatever the cost, it is minimal compared to the trillion being spent to stabilize our economies. Developing the vaccine worldwide will also require an unparalleled production and distribution capacity. To make sure that this vaccine is affordable and benefits everyone, we also need a great deal of coordination and political cooperation. But big challenges also create big opportunities, and many of the world leaders in this field have come together to create a solution. In this context, it is with immense pleasure that I welcome you all to discuss the implication of this for Latin America and the Caribbean. Today we have three really outstanding panelists, and I want to thank them all. Dr. Melanie Saville is the Director for Vaccine Development at the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, is one of the leaders in the race to development and manufacture a vaccine. She has worked on the front lines of the vaccine development for 20 years, focusing on all types of vaccine, influenza, Ebola, the search for a vaccine in HIV, and dengue, in pharmaceutical companies such as Sanofi Pasteur and Janssen. She earned a PhD from the University College of London. We're also joined by Dr. David Robinson, which is one of the world's top experts in global vaccine and biologics, product commercialization, process development, and chemistry manufacturing and controls. Dr. Robinson is the Deputy Director of Chemistry and Manufacturing and Controls for the Vaccine Development and Surveillance Team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has a PhD from MIT in biochemical engineering. And last but not least, Dr. Marco Krieger is the Vice President for Production and Innovation at the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation in Brazil, which is one of the Latin America's largest public vaccine laboratories. Dr. Krieger is an expert in genetics and molecular biology, and there's over 100 scientific publications. He has a PhD in biological sciences from the Federal University of Rio. So thanks very much for being with us. And until President Moreno can reassume the moderation of the panel, I would like to start to ask the first question. Vaccine would normally take years, and if not decades to develop. There are as many 115 potential vaccines now under development for COVID-19 by biotech and research team. At least 5 or actually more, as of now 10, are being tested preliminary in people in what we know as phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. So the question for Dr. Saville, CEPI is a global alliance to support vaccine development, And based on your involvement in this process and in your view, when will an effective and safe vaccine be available for the population at large? And what does that depend on?
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So I think it's fair to say, to start off with, that obviously vaccines are one of the most effective tools in infectious diseases and are the clear exit strategy for COVID-19. CEPI, the organization, was actually set up for specifically this type of situation. CEPI was set up in the wake of the Ebola crisis in West Africa, where despite decades of vaccine development, there was no vaccine readily available to be used in the outbreak. And governments, philanthropic organizations, public health organizations really felt the need that there should be an organization that could make the world better prepared for emerging infectious diseases. So CEPI was formed up to be better prepared, first of all, working on a number of pathogens and preparing for pandemics. So when this mystery virus appeared in the beginning of January, CEPI's role was clearly there to start to fund development of vaccines as rapidly as possible. So it's been really full speed ahead since January. And as an organization, we have actually deployed over $445 million into vaccine development. In relation to getting to a vaccine, I think it's fair to say there are three key words to consider there, and that is speed, scale, and access. So speed is vitally important. As pointed out, it usually takes decades to develop vaccines. And we have the aspirational goal in a 12 to 18 month time frame to develop a vaccine, obviously at speed, but also at scale, with hundreds of millions of doses being available of a vaccine that has been appropriately tested in humans and licensed. And then the third important word is access. So to ensure that there is global access to the vaccine through a fair allocation system. So with that in mind, CEPI is funding currently 9 vaccines in development, of which 4 are already in the clinic. So I think we now actually have a total globally of 11 vaccines that are actually in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. And the approach that's been taken to really accelerate the vaccine development is through the use of the most modern and innovative technologies for speed, but also perhaps the more well-known technologies that can be rapidly scaled, as obviously in a pandemic situation, the number of doses needed is critically important. With that in mind, we know the field is moving rapidly, and we actually have a call for proposal for additional candidates to be funded that is currently out for potential additional candidates. In terms of what are the challenges to get there, there are many challenges. In particular, to go so fast, a lot of activities need to happen in parallel. And in this case, we're really looking at making a lot of investments in manufacturing very early in the development process and at risk before obviously moving into clinical trials. Another challenge obviously is also funding in the circumstance of the uncertainty of such a pandemic. And it's been, CEPI has estimated that we need $2 billion to be sure that we get to at least around about 3 vaccines that are at a stage of being licensable and really scalable to manufacturing in the hundreds of millions of doses. And we have been funded by governments, philanthropic organizations, and private donations. And we're actually very pleased that the first Latin American country, Mexico, has made a contribution specifically to CEPI. So there are many challenges with vaccine development. A lot of vaccines don't make it, but we really do have that aspirational goal to get to a vaccine in a 12 to 18 month time frame.
Thanks, Dr. Saville. I think President Moreno now is ready to take up, and is going to do a much better job than me.
I don't think so, Ferdinando. You're the expert, but anyways, sorry for the technological issues. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Krieger. Through your organization, Fiocruz, you've been working as well on vaccine development. How do you see the timeline and the factors affecting that timeline for the development of the vaccine?
Hello, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation for this important discussion. In our case, Fiocruz is working and supporting initiatives in Brazil for some vaccine projects for COVID-19. However, our projects, like the majority of initiatives around the world, are still in the preclinical phase and should take longer than the initiatives that are already in clinical phases. So, in this point, it's important also for us to follow these projects to evaluate the best and the fast way to achieve a vaccine for our public health system. The global situation calls for a very quick response for shorten the times as we're trying to do. The delivery of a vaccine later this year or even next year will be a remarkable fact, even if it is very difficult to achieve. So we are also cheering for this and trying to start to work with some of our partners to participate in this global initiative. So in this sense, we are working here with two different initiatives, two different arms. One is to supporting the research and the technical development in our institution and in Brazil. And at the same time, we are starting to deal with some partners and companies from all over the world to see if we can work together and participate in the production of the vaccine in the near future.
I'd like to follow up with both Dr. Saville and you, Dr. Krieger. You know, this balance of speed and quality, which, you know, you all referred to implicitly. How is that situation of safety and speed playing out? And what are the things that, you know, certainly you have this huge worldwide pressure to get something out, but how is that being balanced out?
Maybe if I should start, maybe
Please,
on that.
Dr.
Yes.
Saville.
Certainly. Well, in all instances, the safety of any vaccine is really important to evaluate the safety. So we are really talking about a very expedited development plan. And as I said, one of the ways of doing that is trying to do a lot of things in parallel. So in parallel to preclinical work, already looking even at scaling up a manufacturing process to very large scale, which can be considered as a financial risk. But we must always be very careful when we're thinking about safety risk. So in that context, there is no replacement for doing the necessary preclinical safety tests and testing rigorously in clinical trials in humans. And with that, careful follow-up for safety. As well as the manufacturers conducting the clinical trials, there needs to be a careful independent review of safety. And there is a very important role there of the regulators in each of the countries to ensure that the safety of the vaccines are followed up. The actual clinical development plan obviously is faster than usual, but in this case, we're really looking at innovative study designs so that there can be a seamless process through the development process, which includes rigorous safety testing at the same time. So with that in mind, we also think that we get very rapidly to licensure, but that does not preclude then looking at safety after licensure, as obviously the vaccine is likely to be used in very large volumes very rapidly after those clinical testing. So each of the countries need to make sure that their pharmacovigilance systems for capturing safety data in the longer term will be absolutely necessary once a vaccine is available.
Thank you, Dr. Saville. And Dr. Krieger?
Yeah, I fully agree with the position, but I also would like to add that most of the new vaccines, we are using new technology that we don't have any vaccine at the moment that use this new platform. So we need to balance that. Of course, the world need a vaccine in the near future, but we need to fulfill all the requirements for safety at least. So I think we have some important data from the new platforms for not exactly for this situation, but for other outbreaks before. And this is quite important for us to decide how can we go ahead with the safety that we need.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. Dr. Robinson, you know, one of the fascinating and of course only obvious things that could happen is this unprecedented level of partnership that has happened between both the public and the private sector, and certainly the nonprofit sector. We were talking earlier before we began the conversation about the accelerator that was launched at the behest of the WHO, and of course the Gates Foundation has been a key partner, as has been CEPI, and you already received close to $8 billion in commitments from all different partners. Tell us about how you are seeing the evolution of these kinds of partnerships for vaccine development and access, and what are the main challenges that you see today, Dr. Robinson?
Yeah, so we are seeing really an unprecedented level of partnerships occurring, and a number of people that are really stepping up and volunteering to help, both from a company perspective, the private sector, and the public sector for this. Now, these partnerships are incredibly important because of what Melanie Dr. Seville had referred to as just the unprecedented speed and scale that we want to get to, with really is having a vaccine hopefully available for global distribution, as Dr. Seville said, in 12 to 24 months. For that, there's a number of partnerships that need to occur. We really don't have time to build new facilities. Building new facilities typically takes 4 years. You get it down to 3 years, perhaps 2, perhaps, so you can't get it down to being ready for next year. So this has to occur at existing facilities or facilities that can be built out, so-called brownfield facilities where we can add in a new line. So in many cases, we're seeing where a company is bringing forward a vaccine. Even the very large companies, they don't have capacity to supply globally all by themselves. So we're seeing a lot of company-to-company partnerships. So one company may be able to make the bulk of the vaccine, but another one needs to fill it. One company may have the vaccine, but another one has the adjuvant that helps to improve the immune response. And you're seeing these company-to-company partnerships occur. Secondly, one's also seeing a case where some of the early candidates are coming out of academic labs, or very innovative vaccines coming out of small biotechs. They don't have the experience of what it takes to develop a vaccine globally and distribute it globally. So you see partnerships between academic or small biotechs and large companies occurring, where companies have those companies have the global footprint required for this. And third, of course, the private-public partnerships are things that Dr. Phil referred to in terms of organizations that can get together to help ensure fair and equitable access. And companies that are, and partnerships and institutions that are used to distributing vaccines globally, like PAHO, as a very good example, Gavi, UNICEF, also coming together. And this becomes critically important because initially, when the first vaccines start coming out, they're going to be limited in quantity. The more funding that can be raised to increase capacity, the more people will be able to get it. So it's critically linked to the funding and the act and that Dr. Seville referred to there. But also, what you need is people who can help make these vaccines available on some sort of equitable basis. And that also becomes very important to, again, have the large multilaterals involved in this, such as WHO, again, PAHO, Gavi, UNICEF, who can help with that distribution and be involved as part of the ACT Accelerator to work in fair and equitable access. All of those are really happening at an unprecedented level, but they're all extremely important.
Thank you for that, Dr. Robertson and Dr. Saville, and to both of you. You know, certainly in Latin America, we worry about this very issue that you just raised, which is access. How can, you know, using the accelerator, countries in Latin America and the Caribbean can benefit in getting the access when there's going to be this huge race to get the, you know, the first vaccines out the door to every country is going to be looking at their own. So how do you see that happening for our hemisphere? Dr. Saville?
Certainly. So yes, one of the really real principles of the ACT Accelerator, so Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, as David had pointed out, is the access piece. And the main approach there to access is around a global fair allocation system, so that everyone globally, ideally, would be signing up to the accelerator, contributing to the accelerator, so that multiple vaccines can be developed. We know that attrition rate of vaccines is very high. Not all of them will make it. So rather than individual countries trying to take a bet on one vaccine, working through the accelerator, the most successful vaccines, the idea will be that then they will be going through a global fair allocation system. So just to give a little bit more detail in that context in the ACT Accelerator, so for the vaccine pillar, so CEPI is working very closely with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with Gavi, with WHO on the pillar for vaccines. And so the three components are funding the R&D. So as I said, we were looking for $2 billion to fund the R&D. The second piece is the manufacturing piece. And we need to recognize that we need to manufacture at risk, and funding will be needed to manufacture at risk. And then there will be procurement of those vaccines, and they will be then deployed through this system through a global fair allocation system. So that is really the principle. The principle will be that there is the funding and the fair allocation that really will fulfill the world's needs. Now, obviously, fair allocation will be critical at the beginning, where there will be vaccine shortages. There will not immediately be vaccines for the entire world population. And having a fair system, for example, through the WHO will be critical. So CEPI as an organization really requires the companies that we fund to really sign up to this fair allocation system, as we believe it's really the only way to fight the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Saville. Dr. Robinson, anything you want to add around this very important issue of, you know, which is in the minds of everybody in Latin America as to the access and kind of the rules that Dr. Saville was mentioning?
No, I think this is critically important to have a fair and equitable system and to have agreement up front. The other thing about this comes down to also in investments. As I mentioned earlier, the more vaccines available, the easier it is to have an equitable distribution system. And these investments require a mix of both push, so-called push and pull investments. Many companies are speaking to are themselves quite interested in providing vaccine to globally, but they may not have the financial wherewithal to build in the extra capacity required to do that, right? And so they're looking for some sort of way to de-risk that financial risk of building or accessing or acquiring additional capacity. And they're also looking for the pull part of it, some assurances that if they do that, if they do build and acquire, that actually someone will procure that vaccine. And so it's going to be a strong need for both push and pull investments. And this really, we won't get to where we need to be if we just have only push investments or we only have pull investments. We'll need both. So this becomes very, very important. And now is really the time to act.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Dr. Krieger, something that Dr. Robinson mentioned is the question of how long it takes to ramp up actual production. And certainly we look around Latin America, I mean, the big powerhouse in terms of capacity to produce vaccines has always been Brazil. How how do you see that taking place right now? Do you see investments taking place in Brazilian companies to begin to be ready to ramp up production? Dr. Krieger, you're muted. No,
Yeah, sorry for this. Sorry for this.
Don't worry. We're all learning the technology little by little.
Yeah, I think in the case of vaccines, it's important to highlight that we have strong national programs in Latin America. So in this sense, most of the vaccines used in the region came from producers in the developing countries. For instance, I think more than 70% for the vaccines used in the PAHO rotator fund come from producers associated with the developing country vaccine manufacturing network. In the case of Brazil, we have almost 70% of the vaccines used in our programs produced in Brazil. So I think we have this local production capability. We also have here a strong tradition in public-private partnership to introduce new products for our program. So I think we can use this production capability that we have here. It's not a big production capability, but we have some production capability. Also, we have this tradition in cooperation. So I think this could allow us to join this global initiative and support the local production in Brazil, and also to help the region, because we know that not all the countries in the region will have now the production facilities ready to go. So I think this is the way that we are planning to work.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. And I have many questions coming from the more than 800 people who are following this conversation, and one of which is, there is already for June 4th next week, Gavi needs to do a replenishment that is scheduled for that day. And the question here is this a key way for countries around the world to combine their funding to make the vaccine happen? Any and all of you, please answer. Perhaps you can start, Dr. Saville.
Yes, certainly. That event on the 4th of June, it's really there. Obviously, it's the Gavi replenishment, but it is also for funding for the ACT Accelerator towards COVID-19. So obviously, the ACT Accelerator is a combination of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. But within the vaccine pillar, really need to look at the solutions in terms of vaccine R&D, vaccine manufacturing at risk, procurement of vaccine, and delivery of the vaccine through the fair allocation system. And so this event will indeed be the importance of COVID-19 there will be highly featured, at this event next week. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Saville. Anybody else want to add to this, Dr. Robinson or Dr. Krieger?
No, I think Dr. Saville summed it very nicely. Okay.
There's another question here that comes from the audience, and is if you could expand on what has been recently announced by some of the big pharmas like AstraZeneca, and what is in terms of they're believing that they could deploy something as early as September of this year. Any comment on that?
So as I said, I think the companies are approaching this with a tremendous sense of urgency and with speed. And, there are many several who are hopeful to be able to start to deploy vaccines before the end of the year. Initially, those will, however, be limited in quantity. It does take them time to ramp up. It will take them time to get additional facilities online, and particularly in cases where it's a brownfield, as I mentioned, where they have to add in a new line or a new bioreactor. That can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on what type of work needs to be done. And so as they're adding on more and more capacity and doing those things, you'll see a gradual increase in availability of vaccine. But initially, I think we have to expect that it will be the smaller amounts that are available early, and hopefully by next year we'll start to see really substantial quantities of vaccine available.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Another question, which is if you could indicate which are the new platforms used to produce the vaccine against, for instance, what was done in SARS or COVID-2. Perhaps Dr. Krieger or Dr. Saville.
Maybe I can start.
Please.
So in terms of the new platforms that we are beginning to see, compared to SARS, which seems like a long time away now, but one of the main new technologies that is really making progress is the mRNA, so the nucleic acid vaccines. They have a huge advantage on speed. And if you look at the landscape of vaccines for COVID-19 today, it was really quite remarkable that Moderna, who is an mRNA vaccine company, was able to go from when the sequence of the virus was released to first injection of a vaccine in humans in under 10 weeks. The usual time frame is 2 to 3 years to do that. So it is actually quite remarkable with these technologies how quickly they can move. And it actually means that the manufacturing piece is actually taken off the critical path. The one thing that still needs to be done, I think, with the RNAs, though, is there's still not a licensed vaccine for RNA. And so the scale is not currently there that we would like to see in terms of, having hundreds of millions, if not billions of doses of vaccine for a pandemic like this. So the scaling up still needs to be done. So what we may find is that other slower candidates may actually, catch up in the long term because they are more scalable.
Thank you. I don't know if you like Dr. Krieger to add something to that.
I fully agree with this vision. I think for us it's important to understand not only if the vaccine is safe and works, but also if we are able to do the production. And in fact, we don't have a big production facility for some of the new platforms. So in our decision metrics, we are also trying to understand what will be the technology that we can work in the drug substance production, in the IPA production. Of course, the bottleneck of the filling, we can work for any kind of technology. So we also are discussing with the different partners, but in our view, it's important to understand that if we need to produce billions of doses, we should use the facilities that are already ready to go, and also have the clearance for instance, Anvisa in Brazil, that is our sanitary authority. So we need to do the production in GMP certified production, and this is really a bottleneck for some of the new platforms.
Just a follow up on what you were saying, we've seen this huge breakdown of logistics around the world. What are the critical elements that you see, Dr. Krieger, that even though everything is in place, the vaccine, etc., which are the inputs that you see beyond the production facility itself, where there can be breakdowns in the production as a result of all the challenges that we're seeing in disruption of supply chains, glass, among other things?
Okay, in our case, I think we have a very good national vaccine program. So for us, I think the difficult point is to have a vaccine. We are able to do some, unfortunately, we had to deal with some outbreaks in the last 5 years, like the yellow fever and also measles, and we were able to do the max vaccination of our population, even if we are a big country with not a very good infrastructure of transport and also a big population. But we have a strong program, and I think we will be able to deal with these max vaccination campaigns. The most important program now is the problem is how will have the right amount of vaccine to use in this kind of mass vaccination?
There's many questions coming in, and a lot of them point to the fact that how effective do you all see that the vaccine, whatever development takes place, is going to be? Is there going to be a need to do more than one use of the vaccine? Does one vaccine serve for everybody? Perhaps we start with Dr. Saville on that.
Yes, I think it's very important at this time to really have a diverse portfolio of vaccines. I think it's fair to say at this point, we really don't know which of the vaccines are going to work. And different vaccines have different profiles and can be used in different people. So just as an example, you know, if you want to use a vaccine in pregnant women who are a group who will be susceptible to COVID-19, certain types of platform are much safer in pregnant women than perhaps in other populations. So we do need to think of a diverse range of vaccines to ensure that the populations can receive vaccines. Will it be a one-shot vaccine, a two-shot vaccine? Will you need a booster? These are all very important questions. And again, depending on the type of vaccine that you have, some may be effective after one shot, others may need two vaccines. And as the virus has really only been around a short time, we really don't know how long immunity will last and when you might need a booster dose. So it is quite complicated, and I think for that very reason, it is important that we have multiple shots on goal at this point in time, and we just continue to learn as we advance the vaccines.
Thank you, Dr. Saville. Dr. Robinson, just complementing that, you know, the literature says that about 60% of people need to have antibodies for the vaccine to be successful. How do you see that? Is that the case? And if so, do you need these boosters like Dr. Saville said, and the different kinds of perhaps modules of vaccine that you need are going to be needed?
Well, I think the question may be referring to the number of people who have to be immune or exposed before you have herd immunity. And that's another thing that I think is still unknown. Typically, it's a large percentage, right? Even with flu, where you have rates of 50, 60, 70% vaccine at best, you don't get true herd immunity. So it's going to have to be a large number, and hopefully we can get there very quickly, because that will be important for people to feel safe and comfortable in the environment, but that's an unknown number at this point in time.
Do you anticipate, Dr. Robinson, that with this huge push for the development of the COVID vaccine, that other types of vaccines like DTP or measles or others could be in danger?
Well, when we've been looking at capacity, we've been really looking to get capacity where we don't decrease production of other very necessary vaccines, such as DTP, measles, etc. So we are being very cognizant of that. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that mass campaigns, house-to-house campaigns for vaccinations have really decreased very much to avoid the risk of COVID transmission. People are concerned about bringing themselves or their children into the doctor's office at this point in time. And so vaccination rates may be dropping among children. I think we're going to have to be very careful about that and aware that we may unfortunately see outbreaks of against things that we normally have been able to vaccinate against. And so we have to be careful to make sure those vaccines continue to exist, and that once it's appropriate to do so, that very widespread immunization continues or resumes.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. And for Dr. Krieger, how is the plasma for recovered patients used in the development of a new vaccine?
I think here in Brazil, we have some clinical trials trying to use this plasma as a way to use in some very, very hard clinical condition in our hospitals. But this is all in our days just in the beginning of the clinical trials. We have also an initiative to try to produce an antiserum in old technology, but this also is in the clinical trials and will take some time to have the first results. So I think here we are just in the beginning of these initiatives, and of course, the capability to produce antiserum is limited. So will be an option to treat the people in the hospitals, in the intensive care units, if we achieve this technology in the near future.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. For all of you, I mean, there's a lot of questions you can only imagine of many people saying, what is the cost or the likely cost of a vaccine? And especially in the poorer countries, how can they be able to acquire such a vaccine even when it's available? Perhaps you can start, Dr. Saville.
Yes, indeed. And maybe if I point to the ACT accelerator here and the global fair allocation system. So Gavi are really charged with looking at what an advanced purchase commitment will look like, and look at that from a global perspective to ensure that there is a fair price for these vaccines that is related to a country's ability to pay. So this is a very important aspect, I think, in the context of the development. And the best way to ensure that it's a price that is affordable is indeed through this global mechanism that we anticipate will come off.
You want to build on that, Dr. Robinson? And perhaps talk a little bit about this whole challenge that is only natural with the whole discovery, the questions of patents as well.
Yeah, so just in terms of the cost of the vaccine, I think we just have to anticipate that manufacturers had not had the years and years of optimizing the manufacturing process that would typically occur where they can drive the cost of production down. So when we're looking at these, in many cases, we're anticipating the manufacturing cost is going to be much higher than what perhaps we're used to seeing for some of the vaccines that have had 10, 20, 30 years of continuous optimization. And so to the point Dr. Saville raised, it's going to be really important through the ACT Accelerator that's really there to ensure that it becomes available very broadly. Because these, unfortunately, I do not anticipate these being uniformly as well optimized for production processes previously. And then the second part of your question was?
No, basically the whole issue of patents. Do you see, how do you balance that? You recall when the HIV/AIDS, there was this big push to try to bring down the prices of the use of the vaccine, or what was then used for HIV, and there was this big effort to bring down the cost of retrovirus.
I mean, at least at this initial stage, I haven't seen that being a limitation. Part of that's just because there's so much know-how that goes into manufacturing a vaccine, as Dr. Krieger could attest to, that it is in any case very hard to go forward and have other people replicate and reproduce and manufacture. So initially, a lot of this being held within is still being, the know-how is being transferred from the companies that actually have that. And I haven't seen a major limitation of that at this point in time.
Okay, and to Dr. Krieger, there's always the fear, of course, of what can be the negative reactions of the use of the vaccine. Do you anticipate this to be a big factor going forward, or as the vaccine is being developed, that it can have negative effects on people?
I don't think so. I think now, at least in Brazil, we are waiting for some tools that allow us to deal with this situation. So the situation here is really bad now. I think Brazil is the hot spot of the pandemics now, and our population are asking for any kind of tools, like medicines for better diagnosis and even vaccines. So I think as soon as we can have some response for our society, I think that in this case we will not have a strong movement against the vaccine. Because this is really not a big issue here in Brazil. I think in some places are bigger than here. And in the right, in the situation now, I think we don't have this. I think we have now the society asking for some response for us.
And Dr. Saville, how are you seeing something that Dr. Krieger was mentioning, kind of like this emerging movement of anti-vaccines? Do you think, do you see a lot of push on that? And where should kind of the balance and the response be?
Yes, well, I mean, obviously we're in a pandemic situation. A lot of people are looking for vaccines, but there are people who are also very skeptical about vaccines. I think it is very important that people understand the benefits and the potential risks associated with vaccines. Vaccines do have side effects. And sometimes just the perception of a side effect or a safety issue can impact a vaccination campaign. And I think in that context, I think each of the countries need to look at their populations and how best to inform their populations and look at addressing, you know, the questions and concerns that people may have.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Robinson, you know, we as a multilateral institution, of course, are looking very closely, working on everything that you're doing. And certainly you see today the explosion really of cases across Latin America. And, you know, we all follow the curves and it seems that, you know, we continue to go on the increase lately. Probably more than 60% of new cases today are happening in Latin America. So as you look forward around the world, and especially as you know, we're seeing more and more of the extension of the virus now coming to the Southern Hemisphere, what things do you envision, aside from all the lockdowns and everything that we have been doing, to mitigate some of these effects, absent a vaccine and with all the complexity that we have heard here?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the best person to address that question. I don't know if Dr. Saville or Dr. Krieger would be better to address it.
Okay. I don't know, Dr. Saville or Dr. Krieger?
Sure, happy to say. I mean, obviously, lockdowns, and in Europe, we've also been experiencing quite severe lockdowns, etc. Social distancing, all of these things can help to, you know, get people over the peak and make sure that people's healthcare systems are not, you know, completely overwhelmed. And I think all of these measures are really buying time, while actually in reality we need to make sure that the vaccines are developed. I think the other things that clearly could help is good diagnostics to make sure that those who are sick with the virus are isolated and there is good contact tracing. I think that is a critical piece to keep the numbers of cases down. And obviously, hopefully, as time goes on, there will be more effective treatments that become available. But clearly, you know, we are probably in Europe getting over our first peak, but we should expect that there will be another wave of disease coming up in the future, and that just highlights the importance of the need of a vaccine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Saville. Dr. Krieger, you're in Brazil, and as you know well, is probably close to 50% of the cases in Latin America are precisely in Brazil. What would you say are some of the things that other countries should learn in doing and mitigating the effect? We've seen the disease spread, not just initially as it was very severely in Sao Paulo and Rio, but now even in the Amazonian region, now contaminating, you know, the Amazonian region of both Peru and Colombia.
Yeah, Brazil is really a big country, so we faced in the beginning, we were able to deal with the situation in the big cities, but now we lose the control. So the pandemic is going in the countryside of Brazil, and we have really a lot of difference in Brazil. We have very good hospitals in the big cities, but we don't have even roads in some part of the country, and we have almost 40% of the population living there. So this is really a big issue, and in this sense, we need to, of course, now deal with the best condition that we have here, and I think all the society here is trying to do this. But we need to think about, we need to learn with this lesson. So in our case here in the vaccine, I think it's important to push all the people that are working now to go until we have the vaccine. Because in the past, for instance, with SARS and MERS, we start to do this, and after we control the disease, we stop in the clinical phase 2 or phase 1, just because the disease was, the situation was solved. And I think now we need to use the experience and say, okay, we need to have a technology and the condition to do the production of vaccine if we need again in the near future.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. And I know I'm mindful that our time is running out, but I can't help but, all of you have devoted a tremendous amount of your whole academic and professional life to thinking about these issues. How do you see going forward? We have, every country in the world has seen stresses in its sanitary and health systems. What lessons are we to learn on how to change and adapt our health systems for the future, such that they can be more nimble and better accommodating to these kinds of challenges? And certainly for us in the emerging world, it's been what Dr. Krieger was saying, it's brought wide open the kinds of challenges of development that we have, the lack of beds, the lack of intensive care unit beds, the lack of access. What should we be learning, and how should we be thinking for the 21st century type of health systems that we need? Dr. Saville.
That's a big question. I think one of the biggest challenges is that pandemics or even epidemics are very unpredictable. So how do you invest for something that is very uncertain? And Dr. Krieger made a very good point in terms of looking at previous coronaviruses, for example, SARS and MERS. And, there was vaccine development for SARS and MERS, but that stopped when the outbreak stopped. If you just think of a little bit more investment into those, then we would know a lot more about coronaviruses today. So I think it is a challenging question. I think it's important to have those pandemic plans, but specifically for vaccines, I think continuing to develop the most novel and rapid vaccine technologies for the future and for future epidemics and pandemics will actually potentially allow vaccines to have far more impact in the future. So I actually do think we will learn so much from this pandemic that can be applied to future situations.
Thank you, Dr. Saville. Dr. Robinson, I know you at the Gates Foundation think a lot about these issues all the time. It's been kind of the core of the work of the Gates Foundation. How do you think of the future on these issues?
I mean, hopefully the lessons that are learned from this is we have to be careful of the cycle we've been of a panic and neglect. Right, I know we're in a panic cycle again, but it is a good time to react now, because unfortunately people are very aware of the risk here. And the other is, it's the role of an international global response versus national response, and realizing nothing stops at one's border, that you have to be looking around the world. Coming back to fair allocation, we won't get away from this pandemic until we have really been able to reach a large part of the population in every country in the world and in every region. We can't just take an approach of working on one country or one region. And so hopefully the lessons that come out are that we have to have continued attention to this. While it's unpredictable, everyone could have predicted the unpredictable would happen, or several people did at least. And two, that we continue to focus on strengthening the international relations and the kind of things like Antiserum and these other things where people come together and work together, because we have to have a global response to a global pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Then finally, Dr. Krieger.
Oh, sorry. Let me see here.
No, the question, Dr. Krieger, is after all of this situation that we've been through, looking forward, what do you see are the lessons, and more importantly, thinking of the kinds of investments and the kinds of changes that have to take place in health and sanitary systems in our countries?
Yeah, as I told, I think we need to learn with the past experience. In the case of vaccine, for instance, we should have the condition to go ahead, even we control the disease, in order to have the best studies about the safety and try to learn a little bit more about the coronavirus. But I would like to also stress that we need, of course, to support all these global health initiatives. This is quite important, and in some conditions we have some discussion about the importance of this initiative. This is quite important, and for us here in Brazil, I think it's also important that we have this new disease, this new problem, but we still have the old problem. So we should use this new technology, for instance, for the development of new tools, vaccines for the neglected tropical disease, because we are learning a lot with new platforms, new conditions, but we still have the old problems here.
Well, thank you very much. I know we've run out of time, but I really want to thank Dr. Saville, Dr. Robinson, Dr. Krieger. This is clearly, as Dr. Robinson said, we're perhaps still in the panic phase, and we're all learning as by doing, really, as countries try to balance lives and saving lives and livelihoods. But without a question, this is equally an opportunity to rethink many of the things that we can do around the sanitary and big systems like health systems around the world. And it's also, I think, a great opportunity to develop something in the Americas. I think, one of the things that we first saw was the huge amount of protection that existed for the importation of many things. And it's probably a great opportunity for Latin America to begin to follow the example of Brazil and develop far more of our own indigenous industries to be able to face the pandemics of the future, and as Dr. Krieger mentioned, neglected tropical diseases. So again, thank you all very much and have a great weekend.